All right, so in this video, we are going to talk about antidepressant medications, sometimes just called antidepressants. This will go from pages 578 to 580. So by definition, antidepressant medications counteract the classic symptoms of major depressive disorder: the hopelessness, the guilt, the dejection, the suicidal thoughts, difficulty concentrating, and disruptions in sleep, energy, appetite, and sexual desire. So a little backstory. Antidepressants were actually first discovered in the 1950s. They were discovered completely by accident. So there was this chemical that was actually used for fuel in B-2 rockets, and there was a surplus of it. So they decided to test it and see if it could be used as a medication for tuberculosis. It didn't work, but they noticed that the patients they were giving this medication to, they were happier. They had more optimism. They seemed to have depression just lifted right up. And they said, wow, maybe we could use this to treat depression. So that's actually how antidepressants were kind of born. So the first generation of antidepressants consists of two classes. First is called tricyclics, and the second is MAO inhibitors. So tricyclics and MAO inhibitors affect multiple neurotransmitter pathways in the brain. So evidence suggests that these medications alleviate major depressive disorder by increasing the availability of two of the key neurotransmitters in the brain, norepinephrine and serotonin. So even though the brain levels of norepinephrine and serotonin begin to rise within a few hours of taking a tricyclic or an MAO inhibitor, it can take up to 6 weeks before those depressive symptoms begin to lift and a person would actually notice a difference. So these are not things that work overnight. It's not like taking a Xanax and having the anxiety disappear within 20 minutes. These need to build up in the body and build up in the bloodstream in order to be effective. So tricyclics and MAO inhibitors both have some side effects. And when we talk about the side effects of tricyclics, we talk about things like weight gain and dizziness and dry mouth and eyes and sedation. There's also some cardiovascular system issues that can arise, and overdoses of tricyclics can be fatal. Tricyclics are actually also currently used because of the sedation property. If people are struggling to actually get REM sleep, they may be given a tricyclic to take at bedtime so that they can then get that sleep. Tricyclics actually also are being used currently to treat fibromyalgia. So side effects of the MAO inhibitors. And I'll admit the first time I read this, I couldn't believe it. The biggest issue with the MAO inhibitors is the food interactions. People taking MAO inhibitors cannot eat cheese or smoked meats or drink red wine because doing those things can actually result in dangerously high blood pressure, which can cause a stroke or even death. So it's very important that anybody taking an MAO does not have any cheese at all, no smoked meats, and no red wine. So eventually a second generation of antidepressants came out, and they had fewer side effects. So this is things like trazodone and Wellbutrin, and while they're no more effective than the first generation, they also have some of the same side effects, but they weren't quite as severe. So the quest went on. We wanted to find a good medication that wouldn't carry so many side effects but could really work well for depression. So that led to the third generation of antidepressants, which were produced in 1987. So these were called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs. And they primarily affect the availability of just one neurotransmitter, and that's serotonin. So they act selectively in targeting the specific serotonin pathways in the brain. Now, the first one to be released is known by the name Prozac. What didn't take too long after that for Zoloft and Paxil to both be put on the market. So Prozac was specifically designed to alleviate depressive symptoms with fewer side effects, as do Zoloft and Paxil. Anything within this SSRI family has far fewer side effects than the first and second generation antidepressants. So although no more effective than the tricyclics or the MAOs, all these SSRIs tend to produce fewer and milder side effects. but there are still side effects nonetheless. Things like headaches, nervousness, difficulty sleeping, loss of appetite, sexual dysfunction, these are all potential side effects of these SSRIs. But if you think about it, those are relatively mild side effects compared to take this medication and drink a glass of wine and you're going to die of a stroke. So far more people decided they wanted to take this medication. They were willing to take medications for depression. So it gained huge popularity. An estimated 1 million prescriptions per month were being written for Prozac in the 1990s. And since the original SSRIs were released, a whole bunch of new ones have been developed. They've used the same formula and come up with different ones that might help treat people slightly differently. Some of them have fewer side effects. But the whole thing is, because of these fewer side effects, more people were willing to take these medications. So then we're going to talk about dual action antidepressants. These are Surzone, Remeron. They also impact the serotonin levels, but they have a different mechanism, is how they word it. It works differently on those serotonin levels. But these are also considered to be in the SSRI category, but they're dual action. So a relatively new treatment, it's an experimental drug, it's called ketamine. And when ketamine is used in high doses, it's an anesthetic. It has actually been used as a horse tranquilizer, for example. It's also a street drug, and as a street drug, it's called Special K. But studies show that this works really well in treating depression. So one study actually showed that 71% of severely depressed patients who received ketamine intravenously saw a huge decrease in their depressive symptoms within just 1 day, compared to 0% of those taking a placebo. Now, it does have some serious side effects, as with any of these. Things like hallucinations can occur. But they've also noticed that none of these side effects lasted for more than 2 hours. So the side effects have actually spurred researchers to try to find a safer alternative that acts the same way. So find a way to use all of the medicinal properties without whatever it is that might be causing the hallucinations. Ketamine is likely only to be used in emergency situations because its effects really don't last more than a week. But the fast response time, the fact that within hours a person can start feeling better, can mean that seriously depressed people who go to visit the emergency room might actually be able to forego inpatient treatment. If a person is highly suicidal, a treatment of ketamine could actually keep that person from continuing with the suicidal ideation and from needing to be hospitalized. The other nice thing is, during the time it takes for ketamine to wear off, more traditional antidepressants like the SSRIs and psychotherapy might have time to actually start working. I had a patient who was part of one of the first experiments with ketamine. She had lived in a perpetual state of suicidal ideation. Every day she woke up and said, I'm going to kill myself today, and she would have to fight not to kill herself. She started ketamine treatments, and all of that stopped. She no longer had suicidal ideation. Her mood had improved. It did wonders for her and her situation. So antidepressants are often used to treat things other than depression, as you've heard me talk about in some of these other videos. So they can be used to treat things like anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, or even eating disorders. And sometimes they're used in combination with other medications as well. Now, Wellbutrin is actually used to treat a number of other things like anxiety, obesity, adult ADHD. And if you've ever heard of Zyban, Zyban is just Wellbutrin with a different name on it, and it's used for smoking cessation. So if a person is taking Zyban, they're actually taking Wellbutrin, an antidepressant. Why did they change the name? In part to reduce the stigma that's associated with taking antidepressants. It encourages more people to be willing to take the medication to stop smoking. So when medications are prescribed, they're typically done on what we call a trial and error basis. So they get prescribed a medication or a combination of medications in different dosages till we find what works. Now, Many researchers believe that genetic differences and other biological differences, even the patterns of brain connectivity, can explain why people respond so differently to antidepressants and other psychotropic medications. So there's this new thing, pharmacogenetics, and it's a study of how genes influence an individual's response to drugs. So this could actually help get rid of that trial and error nature of prescribing not only antidepressants, but other psychotropic medications. I know that this has become very big with parents seeking a proper ADHD medication for their children. They can go in and actually, it's a cheek swab that they do, and they send it out and they can come back and say, okay, your child should be on Adderall, your child should be on Ritalin, your child should be on whatever it is. And that way it's not so much of a trial and error. So this is actually becoming widely used and highly successful from what I've been hearing, especially in working with children where, it may not, with kids, it's difficult, especially something like ADHD medication. You don't want to put them on something that's going to cause more harm than good. So if you want to read more about the history of antidepressants, by the way, when I took a psychopharmacology class, I had to write a paper about the history of some medications. I picked antidepressants. So I've actually uploaded that into your class in case you want to read the history, including the accidental discovery and all of that. So there's some great information in there and good resources for anybody who's looking for resources about antidepressants.